Welcome to my channel, John Edward. I'm your host, John Edward, and today we're covering a story that many powerful people would rather you never see, never hear, never fully understand. Because once you do, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, silence becomes complicity. I have never seen it like this. Not this fast, not this open, not this brutally unapologetic. When a government turns its own streets into killing fields, when it fires live ammunition into crowds of unarmed civilians, when it shuts down the internet, not to restore order, but to erase witnesses, what exactly are we supposed to call that? Law enforcement? Stability? National security? Or do we finally say the words that make dictators uncomfortable? This is a regime at war with its own people. That is where Iran is right now. Not approaching that point, not warning signs, already there. According to multiple reports emerging from inside the country, despite a near-total digital blackout, the streets of Iran have become zones of lethal force. This is not crowd control. This is not de-escalation. This is live fire. And the scale matters. The scale changes everything. Because when deaths are counted in dozens, regimes deny. When they are counted in hundreds, regimes minimize. When they reach into the thousands, regimes panic. And panic is exactly what this looks like. This uprising did not begin overnight. It did not erupt because of one speech, one law, or one bad decision. It exploded because pressure had been building for years. Economic collapse, political suffocation, generational despair. A society where young people see no future, no voice, no dignity. And when people reach that point, something dangerous happens. They stop being afraid. That moment is the nightmare of every authoritarian system, because fear is the currency of control, and once it stops working, everything else starts to crack. The regime's initial response followed the familiar script: arrests, intimidation, police deployment, the optics of authority. But then something shifted. Reports indicate that around the same time the government shut down internet access nationwide, the nature of the violence escalated dramatically. Think about that timing. Rubber bullets reportedly gave way to live rounds. Pellet guns reportedly gave way to machine gun fire. Crowd dispersal reportedly gave way to indiscriminate killing. This was not coincidence. Darkness is not just the absence of light. In authoritarian systems, darkness is a tactic. Shutting down the internet during mass unrest is not about safety. It is about isolation. It is about cutting protesters off from each other, from journalists, from the outside world. It is about making sure that what happens next happens without evidence, without documentation, without accountability. And according to accounts slowly leaking out, what happened next was devastating. Medical professionals inside Iran, doctors, surgeons, hospital staff, have reportedly been speaking with foreign media at immense personal risk. These are not activists chasing attention. These are people whose job is to save lives, and what they describe is chilling. Hospitals overwhelmed beyond capacity, operating rooms flooded with patients suffering from war-type injuries, wounds consistent not with crowd control weapons, but with military-grade ammunition. One reported account describes a sudden, unmistakable shift late at night. The injured arriving at hospitals were no longer people hit by non-lethal munitions. They were people torn apart by bullets designed to kill. And when hospitals run out of space, when bodies arrive faster than they can be treated or processed, the language changes. This is no longer unrest. This is no longer policing. This is mass violence. Which brings us to the actors, and the opposition could not be clearer. On one side, you have civilians, protesters, students, workers, parents, children, people armed with chants, banners, and courage, people whose most dangerous weapon is visibility. On the other side, you have the full machinery of the state. According to multiple reports and alleged leaks, regular police units were at some point pulled back. In their place, forces linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated militia units reportedly moved in. That distinction is not cosmetic. Police are trained, at least nominally, to manage civilians. Military and paramilitary forces are trained to neutralize enemies. When a regime deploys the latter against its own population, it is making a declaration, even if it never says the words out loud. You are no longer citizens. You are targets. Witness accounts suggest the violence was indiscriminate. Age did not matter, gender did not matter, being a bystander did not matter. This was not about restoring order. This was about breaking a population. And yet, even as the regime tried to bury the truth, it was forced to acknowledge part of it. Iranian state media has reportedly admitted that thousands have died. Officials claim most were ordinary citizens, an admission that raises a far more disturbing question. If an authoritarian government publicly admits to killing thousands of its own people, what number is it refusing to say? Authoritarian regimes never tell the full truth about their crimes. They minimize, they reframe, they lie by omission. So when a regime concedes a number, logic demands we ask how much higher the real figure might be. And then there is the chain of responsibility. Reports have emerged suggesting that the escalation of force was not spontaneous, not the result of rogue units, but allegedly ordered and approved at the highest levels of power. Information said to be leaking from within Iran's own security institutions points towards a documented chain of command. If these reports are accurate, and they must be treated cautiously until independently verified, they establish intent. Not chaos, not miscalculation, intent. That distinction matters, because history does not judge intent kindly. Courts do not ask whether leaders were maintaining stability. They ask who gave the order, who knew, and who chose silence. But beyond legal accountability lies a deeper truth. A regime that must use this level of violence to stay in power has already lost something essential: legitimacy. When a government bans funerals because grief has become political, when it fears gatherings not just in protest but in mourning, when it needs darkness to survive, it is no longer governing. It is clinging. And clinging is not strength. What we are witnessing is not just a crackdown, it is an exposure. The exposure of a system that believes it can shoot its way back into authority, that believes fear will always win, that believes memory can be erased if the internet goes dark. But memory does not need bandwidth. Every family searching through overcrowded morgues, every whispered chant at a banned funeral, every body pulled from the streets chips away at the illusion of control. The regime may still hold the guns, but the people are holding something far more dangerous. They are holding the truth. And when a government must massacre its own citizens to remain in power, it is already admitting something profound. It knows the people have stopped believing. Let's slow this down and look at the logic, because the logic alone is devastating. First, the internet shutdown. Authoritarian governments do not cut off the entire country from the digital world during protests by accident. They do it when they know what comes next will not survive daylight. Blackouts are not neutral. They are preparatory. They are the precondition for plausible deniability. And the timing here matters. Reports indicate that the most severe violence coincided precisely with the first nights of the nationwide blackout. Not before, not after, during. That is not coincidence. That is choreography. Second, the reported shift in tactics. According to accounts attributed to medical personnel and witnesses, the regime moved from crowd control tools to military-grade force, rubber bullets to live rounds, police to paramilitary units. This is not escalation driven by chaos. This is escalation driven by choice. States escalate this way only when they believe fear must be reintroduced at any cost. Third, the partial admissions. State media acknowledging thousands of deaths is not transparency, it is containment. Authoritarian systems reveal just enough truth to blunt outside pressure while concealing the full scale of the crime. If officials admit to 2,000 dead, logic demands we ask why they chose that number. Why not hundreds? Why not dozens? Because the evidence likely made denial impossible, and when denial fails, minimization begins. Fourth, the alleged chain of command. Reports suggest that decisions to deploy elite forces and authorize lethal force were made at the highest levels of government. If accurate, this removes the final excuse regimes always cling to: we lost control. No, control was asserted, deliberately. Documented chains of command do not emerge from riots, they emerge from orders. And finally, the most uncomfortable logic of all, The violence is not working. Despite mass arrests, despite lethal force, despite a blackout designed to isolate and exhaust, protests and resistance have not disappeared. They have transformed. They have gone quieter, more dangerous, more persistent. That terrifies the regime more than crowds ever could. Because crowds can be dispersed, belief cannot. Now let's talk about the evidence, because this is where the regime's strategy collides with reality. The exact death toll remains impossible to independently verify. That is not a flaw in the reporting. It is the result of deliberate obstruction. Internet access has been severed. Journalists are barred. Families are intimidated. Hospitals are pressured. In that environment, uncertainty is manufactured. But uncertainty does not mean absence. Multiple reports, some citing leaked medical data, others citing doctors speaking anonymously, suggest casualty figures that could reach into the tens of thousands. These figures must be treated cautiously. Any responsible observer will say that clearly, but caution does not equal dismissal. When numerous independent accounts converge on the same horrifying conclusion, skepticism shifts direction. Add to that the regime's own admissions. Officials have acknowledged thousands of deaths, not militants, not foreign agents, ordinary citizens. That single statement destroys the official narrative of isolated unrest. Governments do not accidentally kill thousands of civilians unless they are using force at an indiscriminate scale. Then there are the hospitals. Accounts attributed to doctors describe facilities overwhelmed beyond capacity, not with superficial injuries, but with trauma consistent with sustained gunfire. Operating rooms filled, supplies depleted, bodies arriving faster than they can be treated or documented. These are not rumors circulating on social media. These are descriptions from inside surgical wards, from people trained to recognize the difference between riot injuries and battlefield wounds. And when bodies accumulate faster than systems can process them, the truth begins to leak no matter how tightly authorities try to seal it. Visual evidence, though limited and often blurred to protect families, has begun to emerge in fragments. Images of overcrowded morgues, body bags stacked outside due to lack of space, families searching among the dead. These are not staged scenes. No regime would fabricate images that indict itself so clearly. Even the international community, traditionally cautious to a fault, has begun to speak in sharper language. Statements from human rights officials express alarm not just at the violence itself, but at the prospect of expedited executions for detained protesters. That matters, because executions are not about control. They are about terrorizing everyone else into silence. And yet, silence has not arrived. Which brings us to the human impact, the part statistics can never fully capture. Imagine walking into a morgue, not knowing whether you will leave with hope or with a body. Imagine stepping over rows of corpses laid out on concrete floors because refrigeration units are full. Imagine searching faces, hands, clothing, praying you do not recognize anyone, and fearing what it means if you do not. This is not hypothetical. These scenes are being described by families inside Iran right now. Funerals, traditionally moments of private grief, have become acts of public resistance. Mourners chant against the regime. They demand justice. They speak the names of the dead. And that, perhaps more than the protests themselves, has terrified those in power. Because grief cannot be dismissed as foreign interference. Mourning cannot be framed as a conspiracy. So the regime has responded the only way it knows how, by banning funerals altogether. Think about that. A government so afraid of its people that it tries to outlaw mourning. That is not strength. That is panic. Arrests have swept up thousands. Many detainees reportedly face charges that strip them of basic legal protections. Some have been labeled enemies of the state or worse, designations that carry the possibility of death sentences. Families do not know where their loved ones are being held. Lawyers are denied access. Trials, where they occur, are rushed. This is not justice. It is intimidation dressed in legal language. And still, the resistance persists. Not always in massive crowds, but in quieter, more enduring forms. In whispers, in symbols, in memory. In the refusal to accept the official version of reality. This is the part regimes never understand. You can shut down the internet, but you cannot shut down stories told at kitchen tables. You can ban funerals, but you cannot ban grief. You can flood streets with soldiers, but you cannot make people forget what they have seen. Every act of excessive force creates more witnesses than it silences. Every body pulled from the streets becomes an accusation the regime must carry forever. And every family shattered by violence becomes a reminder that legitimacy, once lost, cannot be recovered at gunpoint. So when you step back and look at parts 4, 5, and 6 together, the logic, the evidence, the human cost, a single conclusion becomes unavoidable. This is not a government restoring order. This is a system burning through its last reserves of fear. And history is very clear about what happens next. At this stage, we are no longer just watching events unfold. We are watching consequences arrive. Because when a regime crosses a certain line, when it kills at scale, when it criminalizes grief, when it treats dissent as a capital crime, it does not simply brutalize its people. It isolates itself from history, from legitimacy, and eventually from power. And that is the moral core of what is happening right now in Iran. A government can rule through consent, or it can rule through fear. But the moment fear becomes the only remaining tool, the countdown has already begun. This is not ideology. This is not culture. This is not East versus West. This is a universal political truth. Regimes that rely exclusively on violence to survive do not stabilize. They decay, internally, irreversibly. And the world is beginning to say that part out loud. For years, international leaders spoke about Iran in cautious language, urging restraint, calling for dialogue, expressing concern. Concern is the language of patience. What we are hearing now is something else entirely. We are hearing the language of inevitability. When senior world leaders begin publicly stating that a regime's days may be numbered, that is not rhetoric. That is signaling. It reflects assessments being made behind closed doors by intelligence agencies, diplomats, and security officials who measure not emotions, but durability. And the logic is simple. A state that must deploy elite military units against its own civilians, while cutting off all information flows, while banning funerals and threatening executions, is not projecting confidence, it is advertising fragility. That is why recent international statements matter so much. When European leaders openly suggest that a regime ruling only through violence cannot last, they are not cheering revolution, they are acknowledging reality. Power sustained solely by force becomes exponentially more expensive to maintain. Eventually, it collapses under its own weight. The United Nations, traditionally restrained to the point of frustration, has also sharpened its tone. Warnings about mass arrests, expedited trials, and potential executions are not procedural notes. They are red flags. They are the early language of accountability. And accountability terrifies regimes built on impunity. But the global response does not stop at words. It never does. Economic pressure has entered a new phase. Targeted measures are no longer aimed only at Iran itself, but at those willing to continue business as usual while blood is still drying on the streets. This matters because modern authoritarian systems do not survive on ideology alone. They survive on trade, on revenue, on access. Cut that off, and the internal math changes very quickly. And then there is the United States. For decades, Washington has oscillated between engagement, containment, and deterrence when it comes to Iran. But moments like this force clarity. When a regime kills protesters by the thousands, ambiguity becomes complicity. And recent statements from American leadership reflect that shift. Public messages encouraging protesters, warnings to regime officials, and declarations of consequences are not symbolic gestures. They are pressure signals. They are meant to be read not only by the public, but by elites inside the system. Military commanders, bureaucrats, financiers, people who begin asking themselves a dangerous question. What happens if this regime falls, and I am still standing next to it? That is how defections begin. Not with ideology, but with self-preservation. Increased military activity across the region has not gone unnoticed either. This does not automatically mean intervention, but it does mean readiness. And readiness changes calculations on all sides. Regimes act differently when they believe the outside world is watching closely, and even more differently when they suspect it may act. But here is the critical point. No foreign power can determine Iran's future. That decision belongs to Iranians alone. External pressure can accelerate outcomes, constrain options, and raise costs, but it cannot manufacture legitimacy. Only the people can do that. And right now, the people are speaking in the only language left to them. They are speaking through resistance that persists despite overwhelming force, through funerals turned into protests, through doctors who refuse to falsify records, through officials who leak documents, through silence that refuses to become surrender. This is why banning funerals may be the most revealing act of all, because funerals are where societies process loss. They are where memory becomes collective. They are where fear breaks down into resolve. A regime that bans mourning is admitting it has lost control of the emotional center of the nation. You cannot govern a country whose people are no longer allowed to grieve. You cannot execute your way back to legitimacy. And you cannot erase a massacre by turning off the internet. History is filled with moments like this. Moments when a system appears powerful right up until the moment it isn't. When violence peaks not because control is secure, but because it is slipping. When leaders mistake fear for loyalty and silence for submission. Those moments rarely announce themselves politely. They announce themselves through excess, through overreach, through desperation. That is what we are witnessing now. This does not mean the outcome is immediate. Transitions are messy, they are painful, they are uncertain. But the direction becomes clear long before the destination is reached. And the direction here is unmistakable. A regime that must massacre to survive has already confessed its failure. The streets may be quiet in places right now. The internet may be dark. But do not mistake that for defeat. Authoritarian systems always confuse absence of noise with absence of resistance. They are always wrong. Because resistance does not disappear. It waits. It adapts. It remembers. And the most dangerous thing for any regime is not protest. It is a population that has stopped believing the official story. Iran is there. The world is watching. And no amount of darkness can hide a truth whose time has come.